Hmm. All right. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this year's Writers Workshop. It's been a while since I've done something like this. It was a year ago that I did my prior full blown Writers Workshop talking about Ruby on when I had just finished that fan fiction series and was talking about it. And I did do kind of a Writers Workshop thing with NaNoWriMo back in late November, early December. I was playing Jurassic World Evolution, and I talked about what I had been working on for National Novel Writing Month. Uh, and of course, like I'm always on Twitter and always ready to like answer any writing advice questions people send me. But a lot has happened. A lot has happened. Um, lately, been doing a lot of thinking. With this whole quarantine thing, one of the things that has helped me pass the time is I have been subscribed to PlayStation Now, which has allowed me to play a lot of video games that I missed out on over the years. Like Doom, Prey. Well, technically, I didn't miss out on Prey. I never got to finish it before my computer crapped out, and I don't, and my laptop can't run it now. Uh, uh, but like Doom 2016 was a big one that I got a hold of through PlayStation Now. Sly 4, which was a massive disappointment. Just Cause 4 is the one I'm currently playing. I'm also playing Oblivion for the first time in earnest. I bought it on PC like 2 years ago, and I just haven't got around to putting a lot of time into it. Uh, but playing a lot of those games, some of them older, some of them newer, and working on a video that I have in store for next week. Uh, and watching Clone Wars season 7 and rewatching the entire sequel trilogy the other day. Uh, and the Monty's Vision thing. It had me thinking that I need to talk about writing again for you guys. Uh, because I have a lot of opinions and I've done a lot of writing in my life. Nothing, too fancy or nothing special. Coop, yeah, we get him. I'm a nerd. Uh, but the main thing I want to get across in this, and it's in the title, it's from concept to plot, how anyone can have an idea for a story. Uh, for me, sometimes they come to me in dreams, sometimes they come to me because I see something, I'm watching something, and I'm just like, man, it would be so much cooler if this happened, or if this is the way the story played out, which might be a little arrogant on my part, but anything that gets the seed of an idea. Uh, Michael Rivers asks, "Are you a professor in literature and creative writing?" No, but I have taken a lot of literature and creative writing classes, and I do know how to teach it. I have tutored English before. Not very often. When I tutor, I mostly tutor math. Actually, I've done a lot of math tutoring. I've done quite a bit of reading tutoring, but I've done some writing tutoring as well. Uh, I'm like my quote unquote day job is a tutor. And that's actually kind of how I structure my YouTube channel a lot of times is I'm like tutoring you on how a story is playing out and what's good and bad about it, yada yada yada. Uh Elementary education is my current major though when I go back to school probably in the fall, I'm thinking of switching full on to special education. Uh I was, in the tutoring and stuff I've done, in the um, substitute teaching I've done, I've been a lot more comfortable and felt a lot more fulfilled doing things with special education students um, than in a general education classroom. Mostly because a lot of with the teacher unions and shit. Oh man, uh, teaching is not the best profession for a conservative. I'll say that. Uh, but I mean, my main credential in writing is just that I write as a hobby. I have a book in the works. Working on the second draft of that slowly. Depression has not been very kind to me lately. Uh, and I have probably the longest Ruby fan fiction series out there. Uh, Ruby on is like 1.5 million words total or something. It's ridiculous. Uh, I worked on that thing for 3 years. Uh, so I am by no means the last authority on this. Take my word as you will. I'm not going to pretend to know more than someone like Ellen Brock or Robert Cargyle, who also gives. Um, if you guys are on Twitter, follow Robert Cargyle. He's a writer. He's published some books. He was the screenwriter on Doctor Strange, the Marvel movie. He gives excellent writing advice every single day. He's one of the best people I follow on Twitter. Uh, and it's not just like general, like, this is how you should structure plots, this is how you should handle these sorts of things. A lot of it's about, like, just how to write, just how to, like, sit down, be patient, be strong, all that stuff. And how to get published. Like it's very very useful advice, more useful than anything I could give you. Uh, but anyone can come up with an idea. It takes a lot more time and patience to have that seed of an idea grow into a fully fleshed out story. I think of it in terms of gardening. I think gardening is the best allegory I could think of. Um, because in gardening, you start with the seed. You have to go out and buy the seed or get the seeds from somewhere. You can't just create a seed out of thin air. You're not magic. Uh, then you actually have to put in the work. You can't just like buy the seed and expect it to sprout uh, into a tree. And I've been kind of tossing around some ideas in my head for things I want to work on in the future. Uh, yeah, Cooper. I'm not as familiar with David V. Stewart. I don't think I follow him on Twitter, but I'll give him a look. And Michael, that name was Robert Cargyle. It's like at Massarium or something like that. He's the guy who wrote Doctor Strange. That's what he's most famous for. Um, Wrote the screenplay for the movie. Uh, and he also used to be a movie critic as well. He used to be part of the Spill Crew, which is the group of people that actually got me to start thinking about films critically. They're an amazing group of guys, and Robert Cargyle was actually one of my favorites in that crew. So anyway, without further ado, uh, I've said before, and I'll say it again, that anything can be an idea. You can take inspiration from anywhere. And there is no such thing as a bad core idea. It's all about how you develop it and how you flesh it out. which is why we're going to talk a lot about exposition later. Um, but I usually start with character is how I tend to start my story writing process. Is I create a character. A lot of times it's almost a direct rip from a character that I like from another series. Sometimes it's a mix and mash of different aspects of characters that I like. Sometimes it's just fixing a character I don't like. Uh, Good example of this that I've done. In Rubyond, there's a villain named Levi who was initially inspired by the Arkham Knight. And he was like, man, the Arkham Knight, that's a cool design, that's a cool idea for a character, but they really kind of petered him out and pushed out on him a lot in that game. And so I built an entire story around like what if Ruby had her own version of the Arkham Knight that was trying to take her down a peg. And I built an entire story around that. And it's best story I have on fanfiction at least. Uh but in terms of character, one thing I wanted to address, I have no idea how to segue into this. So I'm just gonna jump right into this part of the pool. Representation. Representation is kind of a hot button issue right now. Uh, and a lot of it's because, shall we say, the progressive leanings of the entertainment industry and Hollywood in particular uh, has more or less run out of ideas, and so they try to put emphasis on really easy things and try to make it out to be special. Uh, and nowhere is that more clear than in representation. Like they'll say, oh, it's 2020, we should have more LGBT rep. We've had LGBT rep as a pretty consistent thing in film and television since the 90s. Uh, like it's been 30 years. Even in the 80s and before that, we would have the occasional like, gay subplot or gay best friend character. Like I remember one of my first exposures to that kind of rep was Miss Doubtfire. Uh, the brother, Robin Williams' brother in that was gay, and he was very flamboyant, and he had that kind of rough voice, and he talked kind of girly, and he had like the very foppish boyfriend thing going on. It wasn't super in your face about it. It was very much coded and was very much like a stereotype, but stereotypes exist for a reason. Like, yeah, stereotypes are only a problem when every character that would fit that stereotype fits it in the same way. Like, having a stereotypical black man isn't a problem unless you have a lot of black characters who are all stereotypical black men. Because that makes everything thinner, and that makes everything less interesting, and makes everything more played out and cliche and less developed, and it takes a lot less effort. And people have a tendency to see effort if nothing else. Uh, this is why in video games especially, things like graphics, VFX and stuff tends to get emphasized a lot in Hollywood and AAA video games because it takes a lot of effort to create those worlds and create those effects and characters and all that stuff and make it look good. And people will take notice of that and praise it and rightfully praise it. Sometimes to the point where they kind of forget to, criticize where it falls short. Uh, yeah, I mean, technically, yes. There's always been exceptions. You can even say LGBT representation has always existed in some form or another, but it got really prevalent in the 90s. In the 90s, it was almost like there was like that quota that started to build up, and is still kind of in existence, where every girl has to have the gay best friend, and uh every group of friends has to look like the Planet fucking Tears. Uh, and the same thing with race. LGBT rap is very much like racial rap back in the 60s and 70s. There were always black people in movies. You look at Gone with the Wind and the jazz singer. Just kidding on that one, by the way. But even in the jazz singer, which is very notorious now, and it gets a lot of hate from people who haven't actually seen it. The whole thing in the jazz singer is that it was kind of poking fun at the absurdity of blackface, by kind of like flipping things on its head, because back in the 20s, a lot of African Americans felt like they needed to be less black and more white in order to succeed. And in the jazz singer, you have a very, very pasty white man who thinks, I gotta be black in order to make it in jazz music, because only black people play jazz music. And so it was really making fun of that. It's actually a decent movie. I don't think it holds. I think there is some things that definitely wouldn't fly today or even like 30 years ago, but it's no, it's not exactly Birth of a Nation, is what I'm saying. It's not anywhere near as bad as it got in that era. It was actually pretty ahead of its time for that. It's same thing with Gone with the Wind, which does get a lot of flack because it like shows slavery as just or whatever the excuse was. And I'm not a big fan of Gone with the Wind. I think it's a very overrated movie, but the black character is like the best character, and it's amazing. She's awesome. Uh, but there's two things when it comes to sexual representation at LGBT rap. Uh, Unlike racial rap, you can't just really have it in the background. Uh, 'Cause if you have black people in the background, it's clearly black people in the background. Same thing with Hispanics, Asians, whatever the case may be. White people know all black movie. But when it comes to like LGBT rap, there's no real visual indicators of that. It's not a race or anything that shows on their skin. It's something more deep, emotional, psychological, whatever the case may be. Um, and because of that, I see why they feel the need to be in your face. I see why they feel the need to be in your face about it, because how would you know if someone is gay unless they tell you? Not everyone can be like the foppish gay stereotype from Miss Doubtfire. Uh, that's a terrible impression. I apologize. Uh, but so how do you do it? Um, there is no wrong answer. Uh, but there is a wrong way, and that wrong way isn't how you portray the gay person. It's how you portray them as a person. Going back to like stereotypes and tokenism, and I'm gonna use an example. Batwoman. Batwoman in the comics and Batwoman in the current TV show on is it CW or is it stream only on the DC site? Uh, with Ruby Rose or whatever her name is. Uh, she's a very gay woman. Cool, whatever. How progressive in 1993, baby. What else you got? And therein lies the issue, because like I said, it's really easy to have representation. It's really hard to create compelling characters. And so characters like Batwoman, Ilya from Ruby, uh, The characters, um, I'll be perfectly honest with you, the characters on Yuri on Ice, uh, the one gay guy from Mass Effect 3, uh, all of these people, all these, like, quote unquote woke stereotype, in your face, two-dimensional characters that just happen to be gay are still two-dimensional characters who just happen to be gay. You know, being gay, being LGBT, you know, just gonna use that umbrella term again. Being LGBT is not enough. Just like being straight isn't enough. You know, being like, I'm trying to think of a good example. I haven't seen a whole lot of bad romance movies because I'm really picky when it comes to romance stuff. But Twilight. Okay, well, let's use Twilight as an example. Bella is a two-dimensional character who just happens to be straight. And being straight, being into Edward, is her only character trait. It's all she's got. Like, when you take something that seems progressive and you flip the terminology to be less progressive and it sounds stupid, chances are it was stupid to begin with. You know, saying, if you take Batwoman, like, oh, she's just a very gay character, that's her whole character trait. You take that and say, oh, she's just a straight woman, that's her only character trait. See, sounds a lot more stupid now, doesn't it? Sounds a lot less compelling. And there's also things to say about statistics. You know, LGBT only make up a very small minority of the population, and so it makes sense, for every show to have like one LGBT character, if that. You know, if you only have like 2 to 3 main characters, chances are none of them are going to be LGBT, and if so, just one. Even though if it is just one, then it's probably actually going to be more like 2 because of. I actually have a segue for this. When you have a character that you can describe as a minority, you have to decide whether or not it's going to be plot relevant. Uh, and if it is plot relevant, then you gotta be careful. You gotta really think about it. You really gotta think things through. Think about the implications. You know. Uh, Birds of Prey, the Harley Quinn movie came out, and it very very much coded Ewan McGregor's character, Roman Sionis, aka Black Mask, as homosexual, and in doing so, the writers of the movie did not think through the implications, because Ewan McGregor's character, who is a live action cartoon, by the way, he sucks in the movie, hates women. Like, his two character traits are, he has 3 character traits: super sadistic towards women, and maybe possibly sort of kind of gay. When those are your only 3 character traits, the implication is that he hates women because he's gay. See how that might be a problem? See how that might rub people the wrong way? Birds of Prey is a movie that circled so far down the woke feminist rabbit hole that it looped around to being homophobic. You know, it took like the very big cliche of, you know, the gay best. It took the cliche of like the gay best friend and the cliche of the sadistically evil gay person, which was a thing more in anime because Japan has less progressive views on LGBT representation than we do. Um, and combine them into the main villain of a movie that's supposed to be about female empowerment. They didn't think through the implications there, and they didn't think to make Roman Sionis in that movie make sense and feel like an actual human being. Because it's so much easier to just play the toxic masculinity angle as just a boogeyman. When really people are people and people are a little more deep than that. Uh, uh, and so, and if it doesn't matter to the plot, then don't act like it does. Disney is really bad about this right now. Uh, like Onward, the new Pixar movie Onward. Haven't seen it yet. But from you know what, I'm gonna go on. I'm not gonna extend my authority on that. Rise of Skywalker. Okay, let's talk about Rise of Skywalker for a beat. Uh, they marketed this LGBT kiss. And there were headlines talking about the first LGBT kiss in Star Wars history. You know, it's going to be in Rise of Skywalker. This is such a momentous occasion. This is such a powerful thing for Star Wars to do. And again, like, yeah, maybe in 1993. But then when it came to it, it was two background characters who I don't even think have names. Uh, like it's certainly not names that we would know from just watching the movie. Uh, and it was so inconsequential that they deleted the kiss on the overseas Asian releases. Yeah, it's so how bold of Disney and Lucasfilm to stand up for LGBT representations in all the country where LGBT rights are already given. You know, and gay marriage is already legal. How bold of them to only stand for what they truly believe in a country that already believes the same thing. Like, if they really wanted to stand up for something, they would have kept those scenes for the Chinese and Singapore releases, not deleted them. Oh, but then they wouldn't have, you know, Chinese lucrative $1 billion box office revenue that they didn't get anyway because China doesn't care about Star Wars. And the messed up thing, the best example of background LGBT representation I can think of, like the most subtle, awesome example I can remember, comes from a Disney movie, Frozen. The shop owner up in the mountains that they come across. Uh, the like he only has a couple lines and he doesn't talk about his sexuality or his husband at all. It's just a picture in the background of a single shot. And they didn't market it. They let the audience find that and draw that conclusion themselves. It's like Bizarro Disney. It's absurd. It's like Disney. 7 years ago, you had like the best background unimportant LGBT rap in the history of cinema, with just this one background character, didn't really matter to the plot, but he felt like a real human being. He felt more like a real human being than the entire cast of your next half dozen movies. Like, I know more about that shop owner and what he's about than I do Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel got her own movie and had cameos in Endgame. And I know less about her than I do this one background character in this one scene of this one movie. Why? Why do I know more about that? Because the directors of Frozen cared, and they still care. Frozen 2 is great. It's fucking stupid, but it's stupid in the same way that all fairy tales are kind of stupid. It's very fairy tale as it goes by fairy tale logic, which is to say, not a whole lot of logic. Frozen 2, better than Toy Story 4, better than a lot of the other Disney movies to come out the last 2-3 years. Uh, and so if it's not going to matter to the plot, do something like that. Like if it's not going to matter to the plot, if it's not going to build to romantic tension between two LGBT people, if you're not going to like make this a character arc or something that they have to like accept about themselves or build a story around it, if you're not going to do any of that, have it be in the background. Have him, look at a picture, have a dude like look at a picture of him and his husband, or have you know, uh, a girl flirt with another girl, like stuff like that. Uh, it's it makes the world feel a lot more alive when you use background details like that. Uh, and this is especially true in visual mediums and especially video games. Because in a written format, you don't have that same luxury of show don't tell. You do have to still explain things through words, and again, I'll get to exposition later. Um, but here's the thing. I forgot where I was kind of going with this. Oh yeah. Set design. I'm going to describe for you two different scenes, and from the same franchise, no less, and give you a minute to kind of think about the implications of what I'm saying. So, in one movie, uh, major character, he has this office. Uh, and the office it's spacious but cluttered. Like there's some shelves and some desks that are cluttered with little minutia, little trinkets and stuff, showing his life, his work, what he's working on. He's got a couple different projects going on at once, and he goes like back and forth between them. But it's still functional. You can still like walk around it just fine. It's there's a method to the madness in the way it's organized. Uh, and and the details are superfluous. They don't really matter. But when you see them, it's like, oh yeah, I wonder what that's about. I wonder what that project is. And it gets the audience more invested. Uh, and then in the next movie, similar character, not the same character, but a character fulfilling kind of the same role, has an office that's just a blank room with a wooden floor, walls, and aqua lighting, creating these light ripple effects all throughout. Which of those two offices gives you more of a feel for the otherwise inconsequential character? Even though neither of these two characters are inconsequential to their plots, I'm just using this as a thought experiment. It's the first one, right? The one with all the little minutia and clutter, and that's still spacious, right? That's why Blade Runner is a far superior movie than Blade Runner 2049. So that's the movie. Those are the movies I just described. I described one office from the original Blade Runner, and then I described an office from a similar character in Blade Runner 2049. Yeah, Toy Story 4 was great, but not as great as the trilogy Toy Story. I was very disappointed with Toy Story 4, mainly in that I thought Woody was great. I thought Bo was great. I felt like every single other character was completely and utterly wasted, which was not the case with the other three movies. It is definitely a letdown compared to the trilogy, and unnecessary. It felt a little unnecessary. Even though I had a really big important ending for Woody, that was a complete and utter status quo change. It felt less compelling and less finite than the ending of Toy Story 3. I thought Toy Story 3 just had a better status quo changing ending. But going back to kind of the set design thing, that's why I love Chris Nolan movies so much. Uh, and I think Chris Nolan kind of gets some flack for how emotionally cold his scripts are, and how much his characters kind of feel more like machines than men. Uh, but he is a master craftsman technician, and he has a way better eye for detail than the people who have tried to like copycat his style, like Denis Villeneuve. Uh, like I watch something like Dunkirk, and I could just be in awe at the machinations of how all these ships work and how everything is working in the Allies' favor, how a lot of things are working against them, and how everything is spiraling around, and how it's handling time and pacing, by having three different storylines not go on at the same time. In Dunkirk, you have three plot lines. One of them takes place over the course of like 3 weeks. One of them, the stuff with the boat, I think, takes place over the course of 3 weeks. Then the stuff on the actual beach takes place over the course of 3 days. And then the plane stuff with Tom Hardy's pilot character takes place over the course of 3 hours. And it goes back and forth between those three, but keeps everything really fit together well. And it's a very well edited movie that shows you. And this is something that Nolan is very good at in how he works with his editors. It always shows you what you need to know when you need to know it for maximum psychological effect, if not emotional. Because again, like his movies are very emotionally cold. Even his most his most heartfelt movie is also his by far his worst, which is Interstellar. Still not a bad movie, just like a 6 out of 10 if I'm being generous. Kind of falls apart at the end. Would have been a lot better if it wasn't directed by Nolan, but whatever, studio hack job in order for him to do his passion project Dunkirk, whatever. Uh, but as far as let's get into exposition. Uh, Exposition is very important, and it's very hard to do, and there's a lot of ways you can do it. Uh, and a lot of it depends on the medium you're working in. Like in movies and video games and stuff, you can do a lot more show. Uh, my favorite exposition stuff in video games is in stuff like System Shock 2, Bioshock, Prey, where a lot of the exposition is done through radio transmissions and messages that you find throughout the game without it ever stopping. And other games take things like text crawls, cutscenes, um, background noise. Thinking trying to think of how item descriptions can be exposition in a video game. That's what Dark Souls does. Um, but as far as a written medium goes, I think the best thing is to not try to overload your audience with all sorts of minutia. And I've said this before. I said this in prior writers' workshop stuff. Say what's important as it becomes important. Don't try to like explain everything the audience should know before the plot starts. Start the plot, get them hooked, and then answer those questions slowly throughout the story. Get them interested in what you have to say before you say it, because if they're not interested in it when it comes down to say it, you're gonna lose them. That's been my problem. That's one of my problems with Demon Slayer. I just like I stopped caring about I stopped caring about Demon Slayer, and it's still like trying to like just dump all of this dialogue and all of this exposition about what's going on instead of just letting the story play out. And it's making this last arc feel extremely padded in a series that's already pretty padded. uh I'll have a whole different discussion video about Demon Slayer when that officially ends. I got a lot of thoughts on Demon Slayer. It's ooh, not good. Not good thoughts, by the way. Not good thoughts. uh So if you're here, you've probably seen what the thumbnail and what the image I have pulled up here is. This is a worksheet that I used in school. I recognize it from my days in middle school, especially. You've all seen some iteration of this. This is just the basic plot uh, diagram, and there's some things about that I'm not super fond of. Uh, but it does get the job done. Uh, title I think should usually come later. Although I am very guilty of coming up with titles first and then building a story around that title, because I like naming. I like naming things. I like naming worlds and people and places and organizations and stuff, and coming up with cool names. Uh, but yeah, you got exposition, and it's actually kind of cut off. Let me pull up the full image, see how they kind of organized it. It's loading. I sent it to Floof over Discord. I should probably just pull it up on my computer instead of trying to load up Discord. Let's see which version loads first. Okay, Discord loaded first. Says it's not loaded. Okay. So with exposition, it has setting, situation, climate, and characters. Um, I put a lot of stock in setting. I know that's not everyone's thing. Like some people just like some of my favorite stories don't talk about the setting a whole lot. My favorite short story of all time is what I've talked about before. Um, it's called "Contents of a Dead Man's Pocket," and I'm trying to remember the author. And by remember, I mean Google. Contents of a Dead Man's Pocket. It's a short story I read a couple years ago in college. Jack Finney, written in 1956. Contents of a Dead Man's Pocket. It's a story that takes place entirely in this apartment complex. Uh, where basically, just to sum up the plot, this guy, he's like a workaholic, and he's typing away at this thing that he needs for that he needs to do for his work, and his wife goes out to the movies, and as she closes the door, this very important piece of paper that he needs flies out the window. We're never told what's on the paper or what kind of work he does. We're just told that it's important. And we know it's important to him. So important that he climbs out his window and tries to shimmy across this very narrow ledge in order to get it because it's stuck on the wall of the apartment building because of the wind. And it's a short story. I probably read it in about 10-15 minutes. If I had a copy, which I actually think I do upstairs, but I don't want to. Maybe one of these days I'll go upstairs. I'll break out my Art of the Short Story textbook, and cherry pick some of my favorite stories from there, including If It's in the Contents of a Dead Man's Pocket. Don't remember if that was the book it was in though. But that was the hook. It's like, wow, this is so important that this guy is like willing to do something borderline suicidal in order to get it. And he does get it. And climbs out, and he gets stuck at one point because the window shut behind him, like slammed shut behind him because it's a jankety window. And he really thinks about like, wow, if I die here, all they're gonna have is this random piece of paper in my pocket. That's where the story comes in, and he starts like freaking out, having an existential crisis while dangling from a ledge. It's super fucking intense. Such a good short story. But again, like it didn't say anything really about the setting. We know it's in the city. We know it's an apartment building. We know the window is jankety, but that's about it. Like you don't have to explain everything about a setting. From what I heard, is kind of a problem a lot of people have with Tolkien is that he would over-explain stuff. But one thing I'm learning to kind of do with my book, and it's something I've had to change about my writing habits. Dialogue is not the best place to have exposition. Maybe in a visual medium, you can have like conferences or a teaching center or whatever. But if you can get through it with narration, get through it with narration because you can do a lot better job summing it up than trying to have dialogue. Dialogue should be saved for characterization. Things that characters say should say something about the characters. And I'm learning this from the shadow pulps that I been reading. There's a lot of exposition in those. Almost not a lot of dialogue. Very 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 little dialogue. It keeps it flowing when you're not saying like who said what and constantly being like Harry said, Sally said, Harry said, Sally said, Harry said, Sally said. Like when you're doing that drags the story down a little bit. Michael Rivers asks, well, setting must be explained, but when does it become too much? I don't have a good answer for that. I think it's really a too much, too fast thing. And like I said, it's just do the exposition as it becomes relevant. Don't go off on Don't try not to go off on all these extensive tangents about things that don't matter at all, because it might feel impressive to you, but the audience is gonna ignore that because we already have Tolkien. Oh whoa, floof. Gideon West asked, how do you as a writer hook the reader? I don't think I'm all that good at it. But one piece of advice I've heard is really start at a decisive moment. And this is something that Overly Sarcastic Productions was talking about with sequels, where you have plot time and downtime. Plot time is what happens like on the page. Downtime is what happens between the pages or between the lines. Uh, yeah, Coop, that is actually good advice. Like, keep it all in your head, because having everything explained in your head or in your outline or notes or however you work, uh, will help inform the writing and help inform the dialogue and the exposition and help you like edit it down and stuff. And if someone wants more, you can always make your own version of the Silmarillion. Uh, but as far as hooking the reader, um, I like the framing device trope. Uh, where you start at the beginning of intense plot time, and then as the story like kind of progresses, you can kind of work backwards and be like, well, how did I get here? I really like that trope. It's a little overdone maybe, but it's one that I've always enjoyed. I've always enjoyed the like uh the one that came to my mind was The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. We're like, wow, back then the only two things were that were on my mind was James Dean and a ride home. Like, back when? Wait, what's going on? And then it like pulls you back to the flashback because the entire thing is him telling it in past tense, so you know he survives whatever ordeals happen, and it's him reflecting on what happened from a point in the future. Uh, and I'm doing a little bit of that too with my book, where uh, the framing device of my book is that it's a collection of uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Not interviews. Testimonies. It's a collection of testimonies that are being collected by the character of Charles Pickens, uh, who is the secretary of the Night Watch organization and records keeper, and is collecting these testimonies for the sole purpose of chronicling Oliver Turner's journey. Um, and so with that framing device, it gives leeway to a lot of different types of things and a lot of different expression, because every chapter is from someone else's perspective. Uh, like most of the chapters are like Oliver or Dodger or Eliza, but you also have some other ones that get worked in as well, and some of them have very specific ways of talking. Very like all the Eliza chapters are meant to feel like police reports, because it's her report. She's reporting to her superiors what has happened and what she's investigating and what she's found out in a concise manner. Uh, Whereas the Oliver chapters, he's a lot more unsure of himself. He doesn't know what's going on or what he's doing, and he talks about like a lot more of his thought process, a lot less dialogue, a lot more like it doesn't really know what information is important and what's not, or what he's noted. He notices a lot less. Dodger, he's a lot more playful. Uh, he's a lot more charismatic and creative, but he is also a lot better at describing these details because he's been in this a lot longer and he's talked to Charles Pickens a lot more. And that's generally the framing device and how I'm making the story engaging by through multiple perspectives. Uh, but anything that gets the audience thinking about the story sooner rather than later is a plus. Uh, you want to pull them in. You pull them in by making them think. I'm doing kind of this like pulling on a rope motion right now. You can't see it, but you pull them in by making them ask questions. Uh, I know a lot of you are probably thinking like, oh, the J.J. Abrams mystery box thing. The problem with the J.J. Abrams mystery box thing is that he doesn't think through a lot of his solutions. He only asks questions and then doesn't have answers for them until it's either too late or too far. Uh, uh, but there is merit to the mystery box. There is merit to the mystery box if you think it through. Uh, for instance, don't know if I want to talk about this. Yeah, I'm not going to talk about this other story I have in the works. Uh, but one of the things in Ruby On, one of the stories in Ruby On, uh, starts with these two characters walking through the woods, and they're all like scraped up and stuff. And that first chapter, I do explain like how they got there and what happened, and why they are the way they are. But it also creates this question like, how are they going to play into this? What are they doing? Uh, who are they and why do they matter? And the answer is that they don't matter a whole lot, except that they kind of help push Ruby on her character arc that she's learning in that story, which is how to balance being a mother and being a hero. Because these kids, they see her only as a hero. Then you have her actual daughter, Citrine, who's still a baby, who will hopefully only see her as a mother, but she has to learn how to be motherly to these kids in order to help them out and be more of a hero to her family, to her actual family, and find that balance. Like that's the character arc that I had her go on in that story, because I thought it was a very interesting arc to have someone so like hero obsessive, um, that kind of like paragon of heroic virtue. Um, I think an interesting dynamic to put a character like that through is how to find balance between their personal life and their professional life. Uh, yeah. So that's how I hook. That's how I hook the audience. I make them ask questions. I make them wonder, and uh, I try to find a framing device for the story. Uh, a framing device that tells you like why the story is starting where it's starting. I don't like. There's a book, Jane Eyre, very famous book. I read in high school. I read it in high school. I was on a Victorian England kick. Uh, and that book bored me because it started at the pretty much at the beginning of Jane Eyre's life, and it's just like all of the stuff that is so not interesting, all building the stuff that is interesting and formulating like why Jane Eyre is the way she is and why she believes the things she believes, but because it didn't explain those, it didn't have those flashbacks of her childhood when they became relevant, it made the entire first half of the book um, feel very dull, very, very dry, and not interesting at all. Uh, Persian slasher asks, kind of off topic, but do you have any advice on romance? Uh, I think romance is a very natural thing. Um, I'm of two minds about it. It depends on the story and the characters. There are some times where I will write with a romance in mind and I will try to build up to it and make it feel as human and natural as possible. And there's other times where I have had I've thought about like how two characters would interact with each other And I end up really liking that natural interaction that I didn't really plan out all that much. And that turns into like romantic implications and just straight up romance in the story because that just felt like the natural place to take the story. Uh, Rubion has an example of both. Um, actually has an example of both, and then also something that falls in the middle. Uh, so with Ruby and Jean, I planned that from the beginning. I always intended for Ruby and Jean to be together because I really like that ship. I really wanted them to be together by the end of the story. And so for like 80 something chapters, I built up to it. I showed them have alone time together. I've shown them like confide in each other, be friends, uh, do more than just like teamwork on the field. You know, that they're helping each other out mentally, emotionally, physically, all that stuff. Just very good friends, and then have that like slowly progress into romance. And then even when they do start dating, they're not like fully dating because they're in the middle of a war and they just don't have the time for it. Uh, and so that was something that I did very deliberately. Uh, and the inverse of that was the character of Rubrum, which was an OC of mine, and Penny. Rubrum is a guy he's an engineer. I made him basically to make Yang's robot arm. And he has the ability to sense and feel machines, and track them, basically. Uh, Kind of a technomancer. And then Penny, who is a robot. And I had this plot point where Penny does get hacked because I felt that was a missed opportunity in Volume 3, so I ended up having it in my equivalent of Volume 4 instead. She gets hacked, disabled, turned back on, and then is scared that she's going to get hacked again, so she's like, hey, who here is good with machines who can, like, make it to where I'm not hackable anymore? And Room was like, yo, I can do that. And then they end up having this really cute interaction, and because they're both socially awkward nerds, I ended up really liking that relationship, and so I had them continue kind of bumping into each other and talking to each other and being cute together, and that was just like, at a certain point, I'm like, I ship it, and then I had them end up together in an actual romance. And in between there, got the multifaceted love tree of Johnny Clay, who I wrote to be kind of this kind of a jerk, kind of an arrogant douche, but who's like really smart and really handsome, and nice, like kind of nice to a fault, where he ends up like smothering people a little bit, and thinking that they can't like take care of themselves, which pisses one of these girls off. But he has, numerous love interests, and I always planned on him to end up with someone, but I didn't know exactly who, so I had him interacting with Citrine, I had him interacting with Nova, and I had him interacting with Prim. And then I ended up going in a completely different direction with Citrine. And so by Ruby on Home, the final story, there was this love triangle between Johnny, Nova, and Prim. And by that point, I kind of knew that Johnny and Nova were the better interaction, but I still threw Prim in there because drama. And because I really like when Nova is angry, and I like giving her reasons to be angry, and Prim is a very good reason for her to be angry, because Prim and Nova are the two strongest heroes of their generation, and they do not like each other very much. uh... Michael River said, indeed, romance is natural, so why can't RT get that right in Ruby? Is it due to it lacking its own story? Um, I alluded to this in my video, on the subject of Monty's vision. Um, to me, I'm someone who's hyper aware of his faults as a writer and his shortcomings as a writer because I've written a lot, so I know where my strengths and weaknesses lie. I know what I need to work on. Um, so, kind of speaking from that experience, what I've seen from the last two volumes of RWBY, last really all of RWBY, to some extent, particularly since Volume 4, but especially since Volume 5. And so, to me, and this might not be true, this is just my hypothesis, a lot of these plot developments in RWBY that feel forced are. But people have this misconception about why things end up being forced. It is not because they're making shit up as they go. I don't think they are. I think they really do have a plan. They have a point A and they have a point C. What they're missing is a point B to get between them. And I think a pitfall that a lot of writers, especially video game writers, fall into is that they don't know how to handle downtime. The plot, the world does not, time does not freeze when the camera isn't rolling. And human beings do not change on the fly. They do not change in an instant. What they do is they have things that affect them. They have these, traumatic or enlightening events, and then they think about it. Sometimes for hours, sometimes for days, sometimes for years. Sometimes it can take years for them to deal with what happened and formulate what is changing about them and how they should change and what that change means. That's downtime. Downtime is when characters think and interact and go into default mode and do a lot of their more boring interactions that don't make it past the editing phase because, I gotta keep people entertained, first and foremost. So, to me, things like Bumblebee feeling forced and the political subplot in Volume 7, it feels forced because they have an outline. And they're not doing what comes naturally. They're not finding natural ways to get from point A to point Z. And so they're they start at point A, they're going in a natural way, but then point B says that they have to be somewhere else. So then they just take a hard left into point B, sideswipe another car, and just completely wreck the story. See also Game of Thrones for a more blatant version of that analogy made manifest. How long have I been going? I've been going for a little over an hour. Coop said, tell them about the romantic conquest of Coop, King of All Bandits. So Coop, King of All Bandits, is a character in RWBY Beyond who is, he's cool. He's just a cool guy. And he was loosely based on Coop, from the podcast, as well as Trafalgar Law from One Piece. And Coop made a request that he bangs Girl Ren being Ren's daughter, Nephrite. And so I made that happen. It kind of felt forced, but it was fun. I got 11 viewers. This is a lot more than usual. That's a lot more than I get on video game streams. I should do more stuff like this. I say, remembering that last time I actually did a stream, in this way completely crapped out and was a disaster. But my laptop was not working as well back then. I had a program on there called ClipGrab that I was using for YouTube, and it really wrecked my laptop. So I actually did after that stream I did kind of a cleanup of the laptop, and it's been working a lot better ever since. So one issue I always have with the plot graph is a lot of people take it too literally when it comes to rising action, climax, and falling action. Climax in the conventional sense is the most exciting part of your story, which should be close to the end. But the climax, really, as far as this plot graph goes, always meant the most the height of the conflict, the like all is lost moment would be the climax. If you have an all is lost moment, which you should, because all is lost moments are good. Yes, Michael, that's a good way of putting it. Um, and also, like, rising action isn't always going to be steady. There's not going to just be one peak. There's going to be peaks and valleys. There's going to be like exciting stuff and stuff to like help breathe. You want to give a story room to breathe. You want to have downtime be implied, but also like show a little bit of that downtime. Uh, in order to just let the story breathe and let things happen a little more naturally. Because if you don't, you're going to have a situation like Rise of Skywalker where things are just always happening, always throwing action scenes at the screen nonstop. And it just gets exhausting after a while. In video games, I think are actually learning a lot from this. And kind of taking it a little too far, actually. Video games are kind of notoriously now putting a lot of the downtime in the game. I've been playing Just Cause 4. It's a fun game, but I'm already starting to feel like a lot of the repetition and stuff. And I'm nowhere near. I think I'm like 2/3 of the way through the main plot. But there's a lot of like big, exciting set pieces and explosive moments and stringing up helicopters and making a tank fly off a cliff and ziplining guys into other guys and just pinning them to walls and blasting their faces off and shooting them in guns and explosions and more explosions and guns and bullets and guns. But then there's also like just 30 minutes of traveling where you're just like doing the same grappling hook, parachute, wingsuit combination over and over again, and it's just like, yeah, this is a big empty world. And that's especially in open world games. There's just a lot of downtime. It gives the action stuff room to breathe, then gives you other things to do. It makes sometimes it makes the world feel big. Other times it just makes the world feel padded. Just Cause 4 at least. I think does not need to be as big as it is and does not need to be as long as it is. Because it feels very, very, very padded. Whereas something like Red Dead Redemption 2, I think handles its size a lot better because there's a lot more like unique landmarks and secrets that you can find while just exploring and hanging out and doing the thing and living in the world. And the travel time between places is sometimes engaging because you'll have like random encounters and it's a very pretty game to look at and stuff. But it does give you room to breathe in between the exciting moments, but not a super repetitive time because you're on horseback and stuff, it kind of forces you to kind of take in a lot more of the scenery and the world. It makes the world feel a lot more alive, whereas Just Cause 4 could just as easily be just a flat plane with random NPCs just stumbling around. Hey, Eclectic 1995. We're all doing just fine. I've been going for about an hour. GQ Smith said video games have optional side quests outside the main plot are a good way for a story to breathe. Yes, sometimes. Though sometimes there's bad ways to do it. Assassin's Creed, some of the games will have optional side quests that aren't all that optional, because in between story missions you have to like do a bunch of side quests in order to get the privilege of going to the next level. And then you also have games like The Witcher. The first Witcher is really bad about this. In the first Witcher, the side quests matter to the main plot, but because they're optional, it leads to some hilarious continuity errors. Like one girl who just shows up saying that she's your girlfriend, like claiming to be your girlfriend and stuff. You've never met her before. Hours and hours later, you're like, you know what? I'm gonna check out some side quests, and one of the side quests is you meeting the girl for the first time, and it doesn't, like, CD Projekt Red did not think about that as a possibility. They really thought that people would just do every single side quest as it comes up. Eclectic 1995 asked, are we discussing the rising action stage of Freytag's Triangle? Yeah, a little bit. We're kind of all over the place. I'm completely scriptless. I don't even have an outline for this. I just had thoughts. Lots and lots of thoughts. Persian slasher, and then there are moments where the game just stops for you to walk for no reason rather than, hey, here's exposition. Yeah, force walking segments are something that are really annoying me. I don't know if it's my biggest complaint with Red Dead Redemption 2, but it's pretty high up there. And I said this when I streamed the game several months ago, where like, oh my god, just let me jog in the camp. For crying out loud. Then there are moments where the game just stops for you to walk for no reason other than, hey, yeah, Metal Gear Rising. No, you want to know the worst about that? Metal Gear Solid 4. The bosses of Metal Gear Solid 4 have like an introductory scene where they all like fight some random goons while you watch, and then you fight them like one by one throughout the whole game. And on top of just being less interesting versions of bosses from the first Metal Gear Solid, and being like just super weird and women and just Kojima being a fetishist. On top of that, you don't learn anything about them until you kill them. When you kill them, you have weapon seller dude just call you up and give you their entire backstory after they died. And he goes on for like 15 minutes for each of them, and it's dialogue. We don't see it. We just get told. It's a visual medium. Like, they could have had like a flashback sequence where we would see what these characters went through to become cyborg super soldiers. But no, Kojima's a hack, and he had to like just have fucking Green Lantern from Justice League just fucking exposition dump for hours on end about these chicks. And it's unskippable too. Like it's like, oh my god, get on with it. Uh, Metal Gear sucks. Fight me. Metal Gear Solid 4 is probably the worst too. I don't know though. Metal Gear Solid 2 is pretty trash. Now, which Metal Gear do you think is worse? Metal Gear Solid 2 or 4? I'm gonna actually put that on Twitter. Yeah, GQ Smith, I talked about that earlier. I love Bioshock and System Shock and Prey and how they handle exposition. Because it doesn't stop the game. Like, you're still playing the game, you're still exploring, you're still shooting, you're still doing the gameplay loop while listening to the exposition. It's great. What does Pot of Greed do? I don't know. It's one of life's greatest mysteries. Loading up Twitter. I'll ask the question on Twitter after the stream is done. I'm gonna actually retweet the stream. Answering questions. Yeah, like Metal Gear Solid 2 kind of started all the stuff that ended up bogging down Metal Gear Solid 4. Like the fourth wall breaking, the forced political diatribes, the weak boss fights, the emphasis on rocket duels. Why don't you consider Metal Gear 3 or 1 the worst? Because those games didn't piss me off. Like I don't think any of them are good games. Metal Gear Solid 1 was at least like, you know, kind of simple and actually had like an emphasis on stealth. And an emphasis on being like a secret agent and stuff. Metal Gear Solid 3 was even better about that because it had the survival aspects. Like you had to eat and stuff in order to replenish your health. 70 Studio asked, for shows and movies, where do you think exposition should come and how much should be told? If you can do it visually, do it visually. That's a good rule of thumb. A lot of times, honestly, in movies especially, they won't have the time or budget to really show, and it'll just be a lot quicker to say stuff than to show stuff. Because of how much they would like to show. And, you know, they have to kind of film and create that stuff. And sometimes it's just easier to be like, hey, we have you actors here. Hey, we got to explain this thing. Yeah, Metal Gear Solid 1 and 3 had aspects about them that I liked more than Metal Gear Solid 2 or 4. Person Slash says, I've never played any of the Solid games, only Rising. And at least with Solid, you know what you're getting yourself into, whereas Rising is an action game. So it could be argued that it's worse. Metal Gear Rising is a better action game than Metal Gear Solid is a stealth game. None of them are very good. Metal Gear Rising has a lot of camera issues as well as the aforementioned exposition dumps being a drag. He seems to be a polarizing figure where either people hold him in high regard or have a negative opinion of his art. Yeah. Yeah. Michael, here's the thing, and I plan on doing a video about this really soon, actually. I'm probably going to record it tomorrow and have it out early next week. Um, uh, I have really high standards for video games. There's not a whole lot of video games that I love. Uh, and a lot of it stems from barriers. I play video games to get invested and to be pulled into these fictional worlds and do stuff and feel like I matter. Uh, so the more things video games have that get in the way of that, the less I'm going to like it. That's why my favorite games are System Shock, Bioshock, Arkham City, uh, God of War. There's not a whole lot getting in the way of me just playing the game. Uh, yeah. Another going back to this kind of plot diagram. Uh, it does have a box for theme. Again, like it's kind of cut off at the bottom, but underneath the protagonist versus antagonist thing, there is a box for theme. I think theme should come later. Um, I think theme is a natural byproduct of telling a story, and should be handled as such. Uh, Eclectic 1995. Speaking of exposition, I heard this is still somewhat of a problem in most anime and in novels. Is this true or not? Uh, I don't know about novels. I don't read a lot of new stuff. Honestly, a lot of exposition problems I've noticed are in older novels, like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea or Jane Eyre, Moby Dick, fucking Journey to the West. Journey to the West takes like 500 pages just to get started because the whole first 500 pages are just about Sun Wukong's origin story. Um, as far as anime goes, it depends. I'm not gonna make a blanket statement like that. Because some anime don't explain enough, and other anime explain too much. Some, and there are some that hit it just right. I think anime's main problem is that they don't have a word for pacing, and that's not just a joke or a jab. Japanese literally does not have a word for pacing. It's literally not a word in their dictionary. They have pesingu, which is just a word that they co-opted from English, which is why it's actually just called pesingu. Uh, so a lot of Japanese entertainment they don't, and this is really a cultural thing where because of the nature of their writings, their history and stuff, it's a lot more freeform and flows ins and out. Like they don't structure their stuff a lot. Uh, Not nearly as much as Western writers, which are more inspired by epic poems like the Odyssey or the Bible. Um, and so there kind of is this problem where like things will tend to drag. There will be too much downtime. The notorious beach episode that every anime must do, is a example of spending 20 minutes in what should be downtime, uh, and not carrying on the plot. Um, and I actually just released part 3 of Quintessential Breakdown on Quintessential Quintuplets, and it covers a lot of stuff that could be considered downtime, as well as plot time. The midterms is a very intense part of the story, or relatively intense. It's not a super intense manga, but yeah. Um, and so you see, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier about like the problem that people don't use downtime uh well. Um, Quintessential Quintuplets is a master class at how to handle downtime because uh for instance, just as an example, uh almost exactly halfway through the story, there's a big confession moment. It's the first full on I love you in the series. And it's a romance. So the whole romantic plot stuff that it really matters because that's what the story is about. It's about romance and family and shit. Um and the next chapter, it picks up like a week or two later, and it's still kind of like going through Futaro's mind, and he's still like, I don't know how to, I don't know how to handle this. I don't know how I should act around her. I don't know how to approach her. How do I tell her? How do I give her an answer when I don't even know the answer myself? Like, should I be happy? Should I be angry? Should I be scared? Should I even believe her? And that creates interesting character dynamics, and it creates interesting conflict, internal conflict and also external conflict, as he's forced to interact with Nino, and he's forced to interact with all of Nino's sisters, who he's also starting to get the feel that they have feelings for him. uh and so goes back to what I was saying earlier about like people don't change on the fly. They have events happen to them, and then they think about it, and then slowly they'll start to open up or change. And some people work faster than others. Um, but there was something that Quintessential Quintuplets just fascinated me with the way it handled its downtime and the way that the characters really slowly progress uh, to the point that they get to by the end. Um, Hello, Kitty. Uh, Son, read the Bible. Yeah, Bible's fascinating, by the way. I kind of want to do videos on it at some point, but I think that's something for like my second channel. Whenever I finally get around to actually doing stuff for that. Eclectic 1995 said, "I am the same sometimes. The theme comes to me when thinking through the story, or when I ask a question and a story comes from that along with the theme." Eh. Persian Slasher asks, "Is it possible for the theme of a story to come first?" Yes, but it's a lot harder because then you're trying to build a story around teaching a lesson, and when you do that, you become kind of preachy. It's very easy. It's very easy to tell when a theme came first, because that's when a story will get really, really preachy. Uh, so Michael Rivers says, "So the closest things do not rely on structure." Not quite sure what you mean by that question. Uh, I just say that Eastern storytelling has a different way of structuring, a different way of pacing, and it's a lot. It flows a lot more from just all. It just goes all over the place a lot more. Yeah, downtime should be for character stuff. Devin O said, "I just finished Evangelion. I have an unpopular opinion. I thought it's kind of wonky writing wise, lots of plot holes." Uh, Yeah, I'm not a big fan of I'm not the biggest fan of Evangelion. I thought it was okay. Uh, GQ Smith said, I think a character can change immediately, but the inciting incident has to be traumatic. But if the inciting incident is traumatic, then they're gonna be in shock a lot. Like they'll change instantly, but they won't like really grow instantly. Uh, yeah, Berg Zeus said Kratos kills his family and turns into a revenge killer. Um, yeah, Kratos is someone who kind of dealt with his trauma in a very destructive way. So destructive that he destroyed the entire Greek world. But he's trying to be better. GQ Smith said, would you consider yourself more an outliner or discovery writer? I do both. I do both. I never start writing unless I have a full detailed outline, but I'm always willing to change that outline on the fly. Uh, and that's what drafts are for. You know, like you write at on the outline, and then you're like, you know what, I like this idea more. I'm gonna change it. I'm gonna rework it, retool it. That's why novels tend to be better written on the whole than any other medium, because in all other mediums you have a lot more time constraints. Um, Hollywood will only give like 6 months to a script writer to write the a sequel to a series or something. And that's just not enough time to work out all the details. It is maybe for some people, but human error. You're always gonna miss something. You're always gonna. It's always a delayed product will always be better than a rushed one. Uh, that's where a lot of things feel rushed. Is that it's just not given the proper amount of time. Uh, Even if it's given all the time in the world, even like Last Guardian, the video game, had like a 15-year development cycle. Ended up being garbage and feeling rushed because it was just a bad idea. Well, not like a super bad idea, but they went about that idea in a way that didn't um, work. And it ended up being really tedious and really short, and feeling like they just kind of slapped it together, even though like it took them so long just to get it to that point. Uh, Kitty Ash wasn't Evangelion mostly bullshitted. I remember reading that the creator mocks people for thinking it was profound and symbolic. Uh, there are definitely things in Evangelion that were truncated and cut for budget reasons. Uh, like there's a lot of things that I've seen people point to as like profound or whatever, and I'm just like, you realize the only reason why they did that is because they needed 5 more minutes of screen time to fill out the 20-minute runtime, right? Uh, Devin O asked, my apologies, autocorrect. What do you usually base your characters off of? People you know or your experience? Uh, yeah, I am a very jack of all trades writer where I do a little bit of everything. Um, there's characters like I'm gonna use my book. Just I'm always a little nervous about talking about my book because it's not published yet. It's not ready yet. It's not ready for prime time. I don't want to like talk it up so much and then have it end up disappointing. But no, there's characters in that are based on characters from other things. Uh, for those of you who are familiar with my content will know exactly who Eliza Alcius is based on from the moment she's first described, and especially what her weapon is. They're like, oh, she's fucking Weiss. She's literally she's just Weiss. And Sir Nightwatch himself is heavily based on the Shadow. Like, he's kind of a composite character of the Shadow and kind of a Willy Wonka a little bit too. A little bit, yeah, a lot of the Shadow. Um, then you got like Dodger, who's somewhat based on Dodger from Oliver Twist, but who I took a lot of inspiration from people I knew in high school and people I know today, like Coop. Then there's characters that based a little bit on myself. Based on people that I've known or I've heard of. Writing a little bit from experience, but also writing, mixing and matching. There's a character who's like one part Ruby, one part girl I knew in high school. Floof Artist asks, what are your thoughts on the dialogue I posted from Tower of God, and what would you do to fix it? I only skimmed this stuff from Tower of God. It's very, very bad. What would I do to fix it? Have less dialogue. Like, the idea of what's her face not knowing why people fight and having it like explained to her is good, but like, if that's what that character was wanting to know, then why didn't she just say it? Why pad out the dialogue by being like, what's fighting? And then being like, oh, as you know, fighting, like, as you know, is a terrible thing, and it's a meme among critic circles. Like, if they know, don't say it. This goes back to dialogue. If you can do it in narration, do it in narration. Don't give characters a speech just for speech's sake. Like, don't have dialogue unless that dialogue matters and is for the character. But yeah, like, really, the main problem I have with a lot of comic books, particularly Western American comics right now, is that they're more speech bubble than comic. Like, crack open a Captain America comic sometime. Rather, don't, and just take my word for it. Save yourself the time, money, and brain cells, and take my word for it. They are not. It's 90% speech bubble up in that bitch, and not good speech bubbles either. Like, if you can do something visually, do something visually. If you can do something in narration, do it in narration. Don't clutter the page with white blobs of text and walls of words. It's not good, and it makes people lose interest. So I want to talk a little bit about sequels. Don't know where I'm going with this. Sequels are really tempting. It's really tempting to sequel bait. But I think it's important to tie up story beats. You should always, if it's the kind of story that you can see having a sequel, it is good to kind of like leave it open for sequels and stuff. Maybe leave some character arcs unresolved, or have a multitude of lessons, like where so that the character is learning like one major lesson per story or whatever. So that's kind of what Harry Potter did. Um, but really, you want people to end satisfied, even if you end with a massive, massive sequel bait. Uh, for instance, I'm using a lot of video game examples. I've been playing a lot of video games lately. The one that popped in my head, God of War 2. God of War 2 is a story about Kratos having to kill the Sisters of Fate to change his destiny so that he can fight Zeus. And at the end, you kill the Sisters of Fate to change your destiny to fight Zeus. There's still a lot of... It ends on a massive cliffhanger after that, because you don't kill Zeus. He's rallying the gods against you. You're rallying the Titans against him. You're marching up Mount Olympus at the end. And there's this big to be continue thing. And the sequel is guaranteed because the sequel was already in production. It was already greenlit. It was already slated for a 2010 release. Or maybe even a 2009 release. Maybe it got delayed. But it was released in 2010 nonetheless. So only a 3-year wait in between games. No more than like a Star Wars movie. Back when Star Wars movies came out every 3 years instead of once a year. So God of War 2 still felt like a satisfying conclusion, even if it wasn't the full conclusion. And same thing with Deus Ex Mankind Divided. Deus Ex Mankind Divided is a story about Adam Jensen trying to stop a bunch of Og terrorists. And at the end, Adam Jensen stops all the Og terrorists. And then it leaves stuff open for him to deal with in the next game, but it wasn't relevant to his fight against the Og terrorists. And now I think about the Deus Ex 3 that we're never gonna get, and now I'm sad. Yeah, sequel baiting is bad when there is no resolution. Like, whew. Let's talk about Final Fantasy VII Remake for a beat. So, Final Fantasy VII Remake does not have a real ending. It does not resolve anything. It does not put any characters on any kind of plot arc, because it takes the first half of the first disc of the game and pad it out with side quests and bitch work and redundancies and repetition. But doesn't give the characters arcs to go through. Like, it fleshes them out a lot more, which I praise. Because one of my biggest complaints with Final Fantasy VII is that I did not give a fuck about any of the characters. Final Fantasy VII Remake fixes that by forcing a lot more of that, character time and dynamics and showing a lot more and making me care a lot more. But at the 11th hour, it's like, oh, crap, we don't have an ending, because the story was not meant to end here. Sephiroth, just, like, we don't have our first fight with Sephiroth until, like, hours and hours later after this game ends. So we're just gonna give future flashes to Cloud for no reason so that we can show Sephiroth, and then we're gonna fight him on the moon and have the time wraiths from Flash come in and try to, like, fix the timeline, and we're gonna kill them, and then that's gonna be our big climactic finish to this first fight. And it's so forced, and it exists only because they needed to try to sell this as its own full price $60 game when it just wasn't. It just was not ready for prime time. The drywall attacks might due to the majority of people currently in the big two comic companies. Maybe. Rivers, are you referring to the Medaka box manga? That thing is notorious for dialogue boxes. One chapter has a page that literally fills the whole page with one speech balloon. I have not even heard of that manga. I don't read a lot of manga. Person slasher example. Character accepts that he is loved by others in part 1, but still struggles to understand why in part 2. He learns to love himself sometimes, like something like that. Yeah. Yeah, I mean that works. Great example. Captain America. The Captain America trilogy in particular. He doesn't get a whole lot of plot, lot of character development in the Avengers because it has to be spread out across a lot more people. But in the first movie, he's already a good guy. He doesn't really have a lesson to learn. He just has to, show that he always was worthy of the super soldier serum. He has to kind of prove himself, uh, and and he gets kind of the physique that he always deserved, but wasn't gifted because, you know, being sick and stuff, and it made him, and having that sickly body, it made him humble, it made him a good man, and that's why he was selected for the super soldier serum, because the last person that got the super soldier serum was Red Skull, who was an arrogant prick and ended up becoming super Hitler, and the doctor character didn't want that to happen again, so he looked for someone who was more humble, and that's why he picked Steve Rogers, and he was the only one who was humble in that whole like camp thing. Uh, and that's why he became Captain America, and he shows that he is willing to sacrifice everything to do the right thing at the end, and he does. And he does get a second chance at an end game and stuff, and that was okay. I didn't like how that messed with the time travel shenanigans, but whatever. Not a deal breaker by any means. Um, and so in Winter Soldier and Avengers, he's having to kind of like deal with being the fish out of water and just played more for gaffs. It's more of a gag, but it doesn't. They don't make him a one note character. Like they don't make every single joke the same joke. That's a problem I have with a lot of characters, especially comedic characters, is that they'll find a gag and then they'll just say that same gag over and over and over and over again. One Punch Man is very really fucking terrible about this. Every single joke about Saitama is the exact same goddamn joke every single goddamn time. With Captain America, like, yeah, he has the, like, I get that reference because that came out in 1939 and I was first in 1944, so I was actually allowed to see that movie. There's a little bit of that. There's a little bit of, after the things I've seen from Hydra, I'm sure, nothing will surprise me. And then the helicarrier takes off, like, well, consider me corrected. But then he also has lines like, "There's only one God, ma'am, and I'm pretty sure he doesn't dress like that," which is totally unrelated to him being a fish out of water. It's just him being a good guy, being a good Christian boy, from New York, and it makes him feel so much more fleshed out than almost any other movie character in the last 15 years. It's astounding. Just like that one line made him so much more interesting and so much more believable and so much more deep, because he's not just this one note fish out of water character. He's also a Christian. He's also a leader. He's got the scene in Avengers where it's like, why should we take orders from you? And then he kicks a bunch of ass. So like that's why. Then in Winter Soldier, it focuses a lot more on that fish out of water as a good thing. Because fish out of water stories are almost played for, like, laughs. It's always like, see, he doesn't get, modern day customs. If Disney wanted to make a rated R Captain America movie, he'd accidentally say the N word, just totally not even meaning it hatefully. It's just like, that's just what we call black people where I'm from. But Winter Soldier's like, no, the 1940s were better times. We could trust our government back then. We couldn't, but that's not the point. but it makes him more of a libertarian hero. Is more like, wow, uh, free, security, but at what price? This helicarrier thing, it doesn't sit well with me. I think innocent until proven guilty. I don't think we should be the one striking first. I think we should just do what we feel we need to do when we feel we need to do it, and that causes the conflict between him and Shield and Hydra, and Robert Redford's character, and even Nick Fury, and even a little bit with Black Widow, who is not from that time and is very much of the time of you strike first and you strike harder, you don't strike at all. And it creates this really interesting feedback loop of conflict that then feeds into Age of Ultron, where you have Iron Man, who's all about like preventing another New York from happening permanently. He wants to build a suit of armor around the planet, and Captain America's like, we kind of already went through that with Shield and my movie. They had the helicarrier program that was going to wipe all of us out because they saw us as a security threat. Like, when someone has a gun pointed at the entire world, whose hand do we want on that trigger? Do we even want a hand on that trigger? It's better to just not have a gun pointed at the entire world. And that creates the conflict in Civil War where, Iron Man is all about accountability. He's all about security. He's very liberal about it. He's very much, pro Patriot Act, pro like interventionism, and pro like Avengers being slave to the UN. Whereas Captain America's like, no, get the government out of my fucking team. Like, yeah, we were brought together by Shield, but you saw what Shield did. They had the helicarrier program that was pointing guns at every person and gonna threaten to blow them up if they were guilty of wrongthing. Like, it is so, like, Iron Man's movies and Captain America's movies, they feed into this conflict that happens in Civil War and tears the team apart, and it's some of the best character writing of the decade. And it comes from a fucking superhero movie. It's fucking absurd. I could gush about Captain America all day long. The movie Captain America, not the last 20 years worth of Captain America comics. My version of Final Fantasy VII Remake is not Final Fantasy VII. It is incomplete and the worst bait and switch I've seen. Yeah. Thankfully, I didn't care about Final Fantasy VII to begin with, so no harm, no foul for me. But I can certainly see why people were upset about it. Let's see, is there anything else I was wanting to cover? But yeah, with those Captain America movies, they all feel like their own complete movies that also feed into each arc. Blue Fire said the Chad Captain America versus the Virgin Ruby. Yeah. Fun fact: Captain America was one of my biggest inspirations for writing Ruby and Ruby on. I based a lot of her character quirks and stuff off of Captain America. GQ Smith said, "When do you think a remake should be done?" It depends on the medium. I think a remake should only be done when you can improve on something. I hate shot-for-shot remakes. I don't think effects, modern-day effects, are enough to warrant a remake. For instance, so one of my favorite remakes is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde from 1947, the Spencer Tracy version. It's actually the third big budget version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde we had. The first one was John Barrymore. It was a silent film. It was very archaic and very, much of its time. Great makeup and stuff. For 1922 or whenever that movie came out. And John Barrymore is an amazing, visual actor. Great for silent films. Then you had the 1935-ish version with Frederick March, which had revolutionary makeup and editing effects and just a groundbreaking performance by Frederick March. One of the best of the era of the genre. So much so that Frederick March actually won the Academy Award for Best Actor for Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Um, and really great movie, and because it was in the 30s instead of the 20s, there was dialogue and stuff, so it can improve on that as well. It used the best stuff that they could do. They made the best movie that they could in the 1920s that they could in the 1920s, and they made the best movie they could in the 1930s in the 1930s. Come to the 1940s version, cinema hadn't really progressed all that much since the 1930s. They were still using a lot of the same cameras, a lot of the same editing techniques. Effects had changed thanks to Wizard of Oz and Citizen Kane and stuff. So people were getting a lot more creative with what they could do with that camera, showing ceilings and stuff. But that wasn't enough to warrant a remake of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. What warranted the remake was not making it a monster movie. The Spencer Tracy version is a psychological thriller where, yeah, Mr. Hyde looks a little ghoulish, but really he's just Spencer Tracy with like an underbite and bushier eyebrows and more wild hair. Like he looks like a completely different person, but it's still a human being. My problem with a lot of the other Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is one of my favorite books, by the way, so I'm really, really biased towards it in its adaptations. A lot of my problems with a lot of adaptations of it is that they make Mr. Hyde too much of a monster. And there's some versions that just straight up make him the Hulk. Like that kind of defeats the purpose of the Hulk, because the Hulk was supposed to be Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde meets Frankenstein, not just Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but green. And so it made Mr. Hyde feel a lot more like a real person. It made Dr. Jekyll feel a lot more like a real person. And it built this thing that was very loyal to the book. Not so much to the mystery of the book, because everyone already knows the twist. But it took it from Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde's perspective, not trying to build a mystery around it, but building more of this paranoid-fueled sense of dread about his situation and about how much he's losing control of himself. One of my favorite movies of all time, my favorite adaptation of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which is one of my favorite books of all time, from Robert Louis Stevenson, one of my favorite writers of all time, even though I think that's the only book of his I've read. I've read a couple of his short stories as well. But that's a remake that validated its existence. You see this happening with some video games right now. Because the 90s, even though they were very revolutionary for video games, they were also very archaic. The PlayStation and N64 were groundbreaking technology-wise, but it took a long time for people to find out how to best create a game with that technology. And so there's a lot of PlayStation 1 and N64 games that are very dated to today's standards and deserve remakes. And they've gotten them. We had Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask 3D on the 3DS that streamlined a lot of the control issues and polished up the graphics a little bit, made it a little more pleasant to look at, and more importantly, more pleasant to handle. Resident Evil 2 remake basically took the plot line and horror atmosphere of Resident Evil 2 with the basic control setup of Resident Evil 4 to make it play a lot better and be a lot less clunky and frustrating. Final Fantasy VII Remake, also kind of decent as far as that goes, because it kind of fixed some of the problems with Final Fantasy 13 and 15 with its hybrid combat by having it actually pause for the menus and the gauges and stuff. And being just all around more involved than even Final Fantasy 15 or Kingdom Hearts, while keeping some of the strategy stuff that made the older Final Fantasy 7 kind of work. So, yeah, if there's not something major that you can improve on, it's best to stay away from a remake. Uh, gaming is, again, like, gaming is kind of the exception because gaming as a medium had a lot of weird growth stages compared to other mediums. Uh, and so you got like remasters and re-releases that just help keep games around and not get lost in the sands of time. Whereas, movies never really had to deal with that technology being outdated. Uh, Replaced, yes, but always replaced with stuff that we can still print the film onto. You can get a Metropolis DVD. You can't really get you can get Metropolis on DVD a lot easier than you can get the original Super Mario Brothers on a disc. Gideon West said, "Did you play the Final Fantasy VII remake? If so, what's your thoughts on the story?" I've seen gameplay. I did some research on it for a podcast I did with someone else. And I think the story is shit. Is there a game, movie, show, or pretty much anything that you want to be remade? I would like. There's some reboots I would like. And reboots are different from remakes. Reboots kind of take the same characters or world or whatever and tell a different story with that. I think that there is a distinction to be made between a reboot and a remake. Batman Begins is a reboot because it tells a very, very different story than any other Batman movie had before. And I think there's still some directions you could take Batman. Like making him an actual detective for once instead of a ninja. Or maybe the Robert Pattinson version will be more of a detective. I don't know. It doesn't look like it though. Not with that costume. US said, "Is the podcast on YouTube?" Not yet. No. He hasn't released it. It's on someone else's channel. It's on the Reaper Cypher's channel. But he has not finished editing it yet. As far as games, I would kind of like to see the original Medal of Honor remade. Same basic level design and same basic story. Maybe throw in some cutscenes to give it more of a story, more of a character. Uh, Same guns and same gunplay. Like I want a first person shooter where you shoot someone determines their animation. Like if you shoot their hand, their first person shooters have really taken a downslide in the last few decades. Like I remember playing Medal of Honor and shooting someone in the balls and having them like kind of double over and grab their crotch and just get all wide eyed and go like, oh, because I just shot them in the balls. You don't get that in Call of Duty. You shoot them in the nuts, it's the same animation as if you shoot them in the chest or the leg or the head or anything. They just slump over. So I would like to see more of that come back. I would like to see a full on AAA remake of Daggerfall. With the randomly generated dungeons and world map, but with Todd Howard's penchant for environmental detail applied to the cities and towns and story dungeons that are important to the story. The main questline dungeons. I would like to see just a world that big return in an open world game. Especially since we've gotten a lot better at the procedurally generated stuff with like Minecraft and Elite Dangerous and No Man's Sky. And I would like to see that facilitate the fast travel system because I think Daggerfall is one of the best fast travel systems ever. And just the depth of the RPG mechanics and the depth of the world, the amount of factions that you can join. Like I would like to see all that return, like just a ground up Daggerfall remake with better, more modern graphics and Skyrim's basic combat controls. Like, I would really love to see that. Uh, it'll never happen though. They'll never go in that direction. Uh, other games I'd like to see. I don't know if there is any other games I would like to see remade. Uh, thought about like what a God of War remake would be like. You know, kind of like do the story over again, but with the end and stuff in mind. Uh, hmm. Let's go for questions. I've been going for over 2 hours. Um, think I'm gonna wrap it up here. It's almost 5 o'clock. Uh, because I think I've covered everything I wanted to talk about. So let's go for Streamlabs donations. Anything else? Uh, give it about 10 minutes. I'll just find other random stuff to talk about. Oh, someone asked about the Pirates of the Caribbean. The thing about Pirates of the Caribbean is that Johnny Depp kind of wanted out anyway. I'm sure there's no hard feelings about him not returning. At least on his end. He was a victim though. He did absolutely nothing wrong. Uh. Oh god, I need to lament for a second. Because Quintessential Quintuplet Season 2 got delayed again. It's not coming out until next January. I'm sad. I'm sad about that. Uh. Let's see. I got a one other video planned for next week. I'll probably throw something together for the week after that. Nothing super like detailed or anything. Nothing that's gonna eat up a lot of my time because uh, I am going to be working on something called Summer of Love, which will be from May 20 something ish. I have the date written down somewhere, but not anywhere in sight. From late May all the way to the very end of August. It's gonna be 100 days, 100 videos. Uh, all talking about stuff that I haven't dedicated videos to in the past. Uh, and I'll have like kind of intro video out in about a week or two, in 2 weeks or so. When it gets closer to that, and I'll explain like more of what it's gonna be like, how it's gonna play, how it's gonna play out, and what I mean by like no dedicated videos. I mean like if I'm talking about it, like on stream or podcast or in passing on a general discussion video, it's still fine. But if it's been like in the title, then no, I'm not gonna talk about it for Summer of Love. So for Summer of Love, there will be like no Ruby, no well, obviously no Genlock because I don't love that. So no Ruby, no JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, no Quintessential Quintuplets, no One Piece, no Yokai Watch, no Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, no Phoebe in Wonderland, no It's a Wonderful Life, no Hunchback of Notre Dame, no Star Wars. No MCU version of Captain America because I did a video on him way back in the day. Uh, So yeah, keep an eye on for that. Thank you all for joining me. This has been one of my most productive and popular streams in a very long time. Usually I only get like 4 or 5 of you guys in here. But today it's been it kind of I think it peaked at like 18 at one point. It's been kind of holding steady on like 10 plus for most of it. Um, if you can donate to the channel through Streamlabs or Patreon, $10 or more will get you a commission video. And if you do that soon, then I'll have that video out by the end of the month. Because if you wait until after Summer of Love has started, then it's gonna have to wait until like September or October before I get around to it. Uh, and then with October, I'm gonna be busy with like Ruby stuff and not quintessential quintuplets. But yeah, yeah. So $10 or more gets you a commission. Like, comment, subscribe. Follow me on Twitter at EAMediocrity4. Join the Discord. Links in the description. That's all I have. Thank you all for watching, and have a nice day, and stay safe. Yes, I want to end.